Here is what the word of the Lord says. It reads as this. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she set out and went and gleaned in the field. And after the reapers, come on, somebody, coming through. All right, the reapers, and she had happened to come to be part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man, who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is a young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers.' So she came, and she has continued from the early morning until now, except for a short rest." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young woman. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. And have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." And then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Verse 11, but Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants." And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine." So she said, "Beside the reapers," and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening, and then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all of my harvest.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted." So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Praise be to God for the reading of his word. You guys can go ahead and have a seat. This morning, I want to add the text for our exchange this morning, gleaning from God's covenant faithfulness. Gleaning from God's covenant faithfulness. There are times in life when you have to put in some work to get results, and oftentimes that is actually many seasons or situations that we're in, we have to put in some intentional work to gain results. Maybe for you that is the gym. Maybe it just doesn't come naturally for you. Like for you to like get into the habit to be where you want to be at, it takes intentional steps day by day of you putting in work and you putting in effort. And sometimes you don't see the results until the back side. Maybe it's with your job. You have goals. You have desires for your job, places that you want to be at in that job, and you're hoping, right? You're working. Feels laborious at times. You're just seeking to do what you can, hoping to get this promotion, maybe reap the benefits of that work at a later time. Maybe for you, it's just you remembering yourself that God works in seasons, even when there's some mundaneness to it, even though it might feel like a sense of dryness, even though it might feel like you have to just be faithful. And in that faithfulness, in that hard work, in that process, you actually then will glean the results on the back end. And it's in those moments where it's hard for us to remember God's covenant faithfulness and to remember how near and dear he is to us, and even how he remains faithful to us, even in the moments when we don't feel that he is near, even when we don't feel that he is close to us. And that's what's happening in chapter 2, because for Ruth, she is pressing into a life that she feels like God has called her to. She's taken steps of faith, but if you look at her life, it's not a good life. It's not the life that you would want or your neighbor would want or anybody would want, but she feels like God has called her to be faithful in this season. And it's all under the banner that Yahweh is faithful. That God is the one who is a promise keeper, and he has established that covenant with his people, that he would then establish his people, he would build his people. So through faith and trust, they're walking with him. And Ruth is trying to do that. She's trying to move forward. And this is all happening at the same time when her mother-in-law is hopeless, frustrated, worried, anxious, to a point of immobility. She's actually not even taking steps and living out her faith in particular ways. She's actually just there. And that's something you'll notice in this narrative as you read it. Ruth talks to Naomi and engages Naomi, but Naomi is like doing nothing. She complains, she's frustrated. She led them back to the land in the hope of trusting God's faithfulness and his promises, but she comes to the land and then just sits there. Maybe you know some of those types of people sometimes where they get into that rut in that season, they complain, that they're frustrated with the situation, but they don't do anything, taking steps of faith in those seasons, following God, trusting him. Maybe that's you right now. It's been one of those seasons where it's easier to do that than to actually walk by faith and to trust God. And we see all this happening. So in verse 1, the narrator begins to describe Naomi's and Ruth's return to Bethlehem, but it's in this verse that we need to remember, Ruth chapter 1, verse 22, where they left because of the barley harvest. Why is that important? Because for Naomi, she left Israel, the spot in Israel, Bethlehem, because there was a famine. Well, the moment that she saw that there was a harvest coming, she was like, game time, I'm going back. We're going to get out of this circumstance. We're going to get out of this situation, and it's going to be better when we go back. It's the possibility of prosperity, the hope of that. That's why she was placing herself in this situation. But as the text begins to illustrate for us here, that as they arrive, they begin to talk about a relative, a family member. It says a relative of her husband, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, which is Naomi's husband who had passed away, whose name was Boaz. So we have the story of them coming back, and then there's this random man they're bringing into the story that's a family member whose name is Boaz. But the text begins to describe who Boaz is, and they say he's a worthy man. Now you might wonder, okay, why does that matter in this narrative as we're trying to understand how God is moving and working? Why do they need to say that he is upright? Why he's worthy? It's because he had a sense of expectation that he was someone whom you could trust, someone whom you could go to, someone who did honorable acts in the community, someone that was respected, but not just before the people around him, but respectable in the eyes of God. So the favor that we'll see that is gained later on in this family is great. It's great because they see how God positions Boaz in this family's life to do a significant work in their lives. So God is strategically bringing them into each other's lives, and it's interesting for us to consider for a moment, because you never know how God might work in relationships with other people. You never know why God has placed someone into your life. Maybe it's some of those relationships with people that you're like, man, we just have a lot of differences, but I mean, you just won't go away. Y'all have never had that type of thought before? You're like, man, like, why does this person like still in my life? You know, I thought by now you would have moved on or something would have disconnected. Like, some of y'all have even tried to give them a holy stiff arm. Y'all say it's holy, it ain't holy. But you know, you're like, nah, get away, create your distance. But for some reason, they're still there. Maybe it's you just don't jive with them. You don't like to hang out with them. Or maybe they don't give you the best time. And so you're just trying to make sense of why are they here. Maybe it could be church folk. You're thinking like, man, like I know I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to walk with these people. But like, I know God's calling me to this space. But man, this is hard for me to press in. You never know why God has placed you in the lives of other people. And this is why relationships are important to be stewarded. Not to be looked at as obstacles or hurdles in your life or something that you can just go after and throw away and just go find new ones and act as if everyone's just replaceable to you. But we should take this humble route because we never know how God will work and move in our lives. We never know what can happen within us. We just don't. We don't know in the midst of these moments how God can use this person 5 years later. Maybe you've had that happen before for a job. It's not always about who you know, but who knows you, right? And so you meet somebody in a situation like, oh man, I know them and they know me and now they want to hook me up this opportunity for me to step into it. Like you just never know how relationships can work. And so this is setting the foundation here for us. So here's what's taking place. In verse 2, Ruth tells Naomi that she's going to go to a random field in the hope of gleaning a harvest. She wants grain. And she's hoping to find favor with the landowner and to provide space for her and to Naomi to live, to flourish. But if you see the key phrase in verse 2, she says that I shall find favor. I mean, she knows that favor is not guaranteed in life, and please remember that. You're not guaranteed to find favor in relationships, that they're just going to work everything out for you. You're not just guaranteed for life to go that way, but she's hopeful, she's anticipating, she's desiring for God to work and to move intentionally in her life. She desires God to work something out. So she goes into this field, not even knowing if it will be profitable or not. Right? Could you imagine going to work not knowing if you're going to get the check or not? Like, I might come back with some food. Some of y'all feel that way. You're like, look, the money that I make, I feel like I don't come back enough to live right now. And that's real. The inflation is crazy right now. Come on, like it's hurting us all. But you understand this idea. But here's what's taking place to help us understand like Ruth's heartbeat, her desire, her intentions in this moment. In this period, within God's law, he set up a sort of welfare system for those who did not have the proper means to flourish. The reapers of a land would go and they would get the harvest, right? And so they would go and they would work the field. They would glean what they could. But in the law, they would not reap to the edge. But let's read this in God's word. And in Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10, here's what the word of the Lord says. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. So this is very interesting here, what's happening here. And this is why it matters that Boaz is this upright and honorable man. Because as he is stewarding the field that he had been given, the upright leader, the steward of this land, wasn't ravaging the entire land, getting every single grape off the vines. They weren't trying to take every bit of the harvest away. But according to God's standard here, they would leave the edges, knowing that there would be those who would come looking for more, looking to glean from that. They didn't seek to snatch every bit of profit for their own gain, but they would seek to leave it for the sojourners and the poor. And so after the reapers would come through, the poor would come along and they would come in and grab the leftovers. And this is interesting because this form of care, and I use the term welfare because this is the sense of how we think about it in our context now, but the sense of care for them required the landowners to be generous with God's provision because it first came from God, but it also challenged those individuals to be intentional in working to gain the benefits from gleaning in those fields at the edges. There was an intentionality from the people to say, hey, look, I'm stewarding this for God, and if God wants me to help to care for people, and if they'll come and work it, they could glean the benefits from the blessings that I've received from God. I mean, this is human accountability and generosity meeting and colliding right here. And that's a great vision for us to catch as God's people. That for some, God has gifted you with a knack and ability to prosper as an entrepreneur, to steward the benefits that you've been given. And God is challenging you to steward that money for the sake of his people moving forward, but also to care for those who are around you. Right? Another contemporary way to look at this, even for people in a business sense, is like if a business owner has a company, his profit margin, they're killing it, crushing it, but the workers can't live. I mean, the gains are crazy, but not paying them living wage, not even giving the room, the possibility for them to be able to take steps forward. I'm not going to go deeper into that. This is just an idea for us to consider that even within God's word, there's a process in caring for those who are not well off and thinking about how do we see them in the purview of our lives? How do we see them in light of what we are going through? So this is what's taking place in this moment when Ruth is going to this field. She's that person seeking to glean. So in verse 4, the passage brings us to the part of the story where it starts to identify her in the field, and Boaz sees her. He comes to land, he stops and looks at the reapers, and then here's what he says. First, the Lord be with you. He's given us another example of godly leadership here. As Boaz is engaging his workers, the first thing that he is saying to them is to think about God. And he's kind of challenging them, saying like, hey, I know the Lord's with you in the work that you are doing. Boaz, as a good leader, doesn't just see them, right, as workers for their own gain, but first, those who've been created in God's image, right? Those who have value and worth. So it matters how you treat your workers. Come on. And so as he sees them, the Lord be with you. Could you imagine if your boss came to you at your job, just like, hey, look, I know it's another day, but I'm just praying that the Lord would be with you today in your work. I mean, that would change your understanding of the workplace. You're like, man, like, You want God to be in this? Like you're trusting me to trust him? Like you're challenging me towards this? That would be such a blessing. And that's what good leaders do. If God is giving you the place as a leader and giving you the opportunity to speak in, to sow into people's lives in this way, that you get to set the thermostat for the spaces that you create. And you can be the person that can challenge and encourage people to move forward in faith. You can encourage them to think positively about their God. See, this shifts the perspective of a workplace. And this is why it's a grace when God has placed us in a space where there's Christian leaders in our sphere. But in the same way, some of y'all work in spaces where that's not the case, and there's issues, there's struggles, and you're trying to navigate your industry in light of your faith and everything. This is just a reminder of how God can use leadership, how God can work. And so this should be an encouragement to all of us about the possibilities here. But not only is Boaz acting this way as a leader, look at how they respond. The Lord bless you. So he's looking at them saying, hey, Lord, be with you in your work today. And they're like, hey, the Lord bless you. So we have this back and forth going on here where there's a mutual appreciation for the work of the Lord that is happening in this land. There was a respect for him. Do you have the tendency to respect leaders, to trust them? Particularly even like good Christian leaders, do you trust them? Maybe you're the person that's kind of always finds yourself skeptical of leaders and their leadership. And here's my ploy to you that I'm trying to challenge you with to get you to consider. If that's you, if you're that person that just like, no matter where you go, you're always questioning leaders and the integrity and the possibility, that's a really hard life. And I pray for your sake that you're never entrusted with the role of a leader. Because being a leader is hard. And it's quite honorary to assume that you should gain a position of leadership when you never trust anyone else. So why should someone trust you? And I'm saying that in love because you shouldn't be that person. But there are people, y'all know, people who complain about every other leader. I do it this way, I do it that way, do it better. And then when you get in that situation, you're like, oh, this is a lot harder. That's why I say that. I say that in love. But here's the reality. You need to develop a vision for trusting good and healthy leaders that they will look out for you, but they also will do what is right. So when you see that within leaders, you should affirm that. You should support that when you find good and healthy leadership. Right now in our culture, though, there's quite often the vision of you just talk about the negative all the time. So you only hear about the downfall of leaders and how bad they are and how they need to get themselves together and how you can't trust anybody or the system and all that type of stuff. You can go to any space and hear those conversations. But what if we affirmed good leadership and valuable leadership and we tried to push that vision forward and maybe others can catch a vision? So with that being said, they trusted Boaz as a leader of the field, that he would steward the resources well, that they could trust him because his actions were backing it. We'll see that later with how he cares for Ruth, that there was uprightness there. His reputation preceded him. But also on the other side of that, we do need to be very honest about unhealthy leadership too. But there are good ways you can do that are profitable. There's unprofitable ways too. I'm not talking about in the break room, everybody complaining about their boss. What I'm not talking about is you going and having an event session with someone because you can just say whatever you want behind your boss's back. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about the honesty of us wanting to see people live up to God's standard and want them to look like Jesus and that's the heartbeat and the desire. Brothers and sisters, please do not get it twisted there. So what's happening in this text is that Boaz looks at the reapers and asks about the young Moabite woman. After they've had this mutual respect exchange, he even trusts their understanding. He can see that she's from a different context than them. He's aware of that. You know anything about Moabites and the region they come from? Like it was pretty obvious that she wasn't from Bethlehem. And then they started actually kind of testifying to who she was. They began to describe her and the country that she was from and whom she was with and how she had been faithful. They said the good even about the people that were around them, right? You know, think about that in the workplace. Those moments when you also want to say the good things about your coworkers, your colleagues. You don't want to say the negative stuff about them, right? No matter what their rank are in the business. I don't know where you're at in your jobs, whether you're a manager, whether you have people under you, whether you feel like you're at the bottom, whatever. There's room for us all to steward these relationships. But in verse 7, Ruth then responds and says, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reaper. She's not even asking to get ahead of them. She's actually just wanting to be in the right place. She's like, look, let me just come after your people have gleaned and gotten what they needed. I just want whatever I can get. And this is where it's helpful for us to understand that she's asking for scraps. Just to put it in contemporary terms, she's not asking for a lot. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. So in verse 8, Boaz then responds to her and he's like, hey, do not go into another field or leave this one. But he asks her to keep close to his young women and to stay with them. And so this is already a moment where Ruth is starting to gain favor within his sight. He continues on and he says, like, hey, I don't want you to go into these other lands, these other spaces where you could be taken advantage of. But in honor, he wants her to be there, to be near his people, even though she was the outsider, even though she didn't fit in probably with the rest of the workers, didn't have the right attire, the right get up. He's like, no, you stay with my people and you be in this space. And Boaz's ability to want to protect her is even him acknowledging the perversiveness of even people in other lands. There's this idea of her being taken advantage of. He's like, I don't want you to go to another field who would not care for you well, but I want you to stay here because we'll do what is right for you here. That's another mark on his uprightness. He could say, hey, go on to another land, you'll be another person's problem. But he wants to make sure that she is not taken advantage of. And I want to say this too about godly leaders. They do not let their sisters be abused, but they speak out against it. They push them away from going into spaces that sisters can be hurt. But they seek to protect, to provide, and to care for. And this is why he says to her shortly after that to then drink after the vessels of water that the reapers get to enjoy. So all right, so she's moving from the scraps of the end of it. If you've ever been like berry picking or anything like that, you typically want to grab the berries or whatnot that are on the vine. You're not going for the ones that are in the dirt that everybody stepped on all over. She went from the ones that people have stepped on over to saying, hey, come on, you come to the good stuff that we got over here, and you come reap those benefits. So they say, hey, my workers, you need to come drink from what they were drinking out of, and now you will be able to begin to enjoy the blessings that they received through God. Let me help us to understand it another way. She didn't have to go down to the riverbank and get on her knees and scoop out water into her mouth. See, this changes everything because God worked through Boaz to put her in proximity to him that he could provide these opportunities to look out for her. And so God is working out this story together, and she's wondering, why have I received this type of treatment? And here's where it comes down to the faithfulness throughout our lives. Verse 11, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. In other words, he sees her diligence. He sees her faithfulness to the Lord our God, but also to Naomi, even in a dry season. Even in a season where the world did not see her as valued, she remained faithful. Maybe you felt that in a season before where you feel like others don't value you, your purpose, what you're contributing, what you're giving to a space, and you feel like it's been a season of dryness where you feel like you're all alone and you're trying to find a way forward where nothing's going the right way. This is one of those seasons for her, but she remained as faithful as she could to God and the responsibility that she had been given. So I want to say this to you today. Maybe it's been a hard season for you, for your family. Maybe you felt the dryness, but I want to tell you this morning that your dry seasons are not meaningless. You might be wanting to get out of this chapter of your life as quick as you can, but it has purpose. God can use it. God can work in spite of the situations that you are in. And it's your faithfulness in the mundane that can lead to the blessings on the back side. See, it was unpopular for Ruth to care for her mother-in-law, which is a big factor in Boaz's decision. I mean, by the standards of this time, in essence, I'm going to use contemporary terms, but she was in her prime years. Basically, she was at a good age where she could go remarry if she wanted to. She could go have the life and have opportunities set before her, but she chose to be with her mother-in-law and to labor and to care for her. She could have created another life. Hers and Naomi's situation is a lot different here. Naomi's in a different season of life where it'd be a lot harder for her to have the opportunities that Ruth had in this season. So in this moment, when we see her faithfulness in it, it means a lot to the narrative and our understanding. Because she wanted to be faithful to God and she prioritized him. That's why she cared for Naomi. And we talked about it last week that she wanted to be with Naomi's people and their God. That's why she did it. So this is a good reminder for us that even in those trying seasons, continue to hold fast to God and continue in faithfulness. So as she's taken back by the kindness of Boaz and how he spoke to her with such honor and respect and valued her, he continues to add on to this kindness over time. Because he adds on to this kindness as it's building, right? So she's reaping on the side of the field. Now till she's drinking the water with the reapers. To this point where in his kindness, he's like, hey, you need to be done with the scraps completely. Come sit at the table. Like, you are welcome to the table. Sit with us here and dine with us. Her life had changed. She would have been like a dog trying to grab the crumbs after you drop them from your plate on the ground to now sitting at the table, eating with. For the record, your dogs probably shouldn't sit at the table eat with you. I say that in love for some of y'all, but it's a joke. Don't take it too serious. Some of y'all are like going to write me an email. That's the most controversial theological thing I've said this week for y'all. And so that's how they're viewed her, but she's given this value. She has value. She's had value, but he welcomes her to the table. But this is how there's rich gospel truth for us here. Because we too are those who are poor, grasping for satisfaction in this world. Those who are longing to be fulfilled, even in light of our situations that we are in. I mean, we are searching anywhere and everywhere to only to find the crumbs in this world that we can barely put on our plates. But then the Redeemer came in and he rescued us. And we move from those who are longing for scraps, going through this world, trying to grab anything and everything to satisfy our palate, to those who get to sit at the banquet seat at the table with the Father, enjoying the fruits of the blessings that you get to take and you get to eat of the benefits of the covenant, blessings that Christ has brought to us, that you get to take and eat the bread of life, the true one, Jesus, the Son who was slain for us, the Son who came and lived a perfect and sinless life and laid it down so that you could have the fullness of life, so that you can leave satisfied too. See, that's the good news of the gospel and the story. That you were the one that was wandering, that you were the one that was looking. But Jesus came near. And here's the good news of this illustration is that in the end times, when we get to sit with the Father, we get to return to the table. Where it started with sin's entrance over eating the food, right? The apple in the garden. It will culminate the story with us feasting with the Father forever. It says you're on your sojourner journey, looking for that satisfaction. I want to tell you this morning, you have to look no more, my friends, because Jesus has satisfied everything that you need. He is the bread that you need in your life, and you need to look to him. I hope somebody's with me this morning, because that's good news. I've had some wandering seasons where I went looking for many things in life to give me momentary satisfaction. I've had the moments in life where there was things I was doing on Saturday that I had no business doing because I was trying to figure out who I am and where my hope would be at. I was the person that could easily be caught off guard by something and start having a vain pursuit into something that would get me nowhere. And if you all are like me this morning, this is good news. You're more like Ruth than what you think. And that's sometimes people's disconnect with this story, because you believe that you're more like Boaz than Ruth. That you would be the one that would provide for someone, give them a better situation, and you would be the redeemer of the story. And you miss out on the redeemer of your story along the way, because you've been missing out how you've been satisfied with the crumbs for so long. See, Jesus says, come, your bread is given to you. The new wine is here for you. I provided it for you. Come and find satisfaction in me. And that is the goodness of the Lord being shown to us in this text. He didn't just take her from the famine land. He gave her an abundance of resources so that her basket and her cup overflowed, and it didn't stop there. That the blessings that she received from God could then extend to others, because she took it home and said, look, here are all the benefits of this Redeemer, what he's done in my life. So this moment is resting here for us, and Boaz then looks at his men and tells them, hey, let her go grab some more. It doesn't stop there. After the dry season, if we're counting here, right? He comes, allows her to glean from the land. He then gives her water from the same vessels that his workers had. He then invites her to the table to eat with them. And then says, okay, now go grab whatever else you need. He didn't just stop and see the poor person on the road and say, okay, here's $5, see ya. He didn't just go to her and say, okay, all right, look, I got you what you need here with a few supplies, okay, bye. But sent out in abundance with what she needed. So all of this is happening and taking place. And as the text communicates, she came back with about 60 pounds of barley and her food left over, and she brings it to Naomi. Could you imagine Naomi's face in that situation? Well, it makes sense when she straight up asks her, where did you glean today? Where were you at? Who were you with? Let me know how you got all of that. I need to know. And where have you worked? Essentially, she has two different questions there. Where did you glean and where did you work? Because she knew that wasn't just the average gleaning. She had seen it happen. She thought she took on a job somewhere and that she had gained all these benefits. And then she simply says, blessed be the man who took notice of you. So Ruth begins to recall to Naomi about the man that took care of her. And if you notice in the text, this is a moment, this is around verse 19 downward, that Naomi's posture begins to change. If you don't recall, Naomi was fairly bitter, upset in chapter 1. We don't see her posture change going into chapter 2. It is not until she sees what Ruth brings back and she notices that she had received a blessing. And then in verse 20, Naomi begins to respond to her, may he be blessed by the Lord. May he be blessed by the Lord. So going back to our understanding of where Naomi's at in this situation, because we're not hearing from her, she's frustrated about her situation. She's bitter in these moments. She's probably around the age of 50s or so. We're not going to give an exact number. She was actually able to do something to work. But she's at the home kind of soaking in her circumstance and her situation. But it wasn't until this moment that she very clearly and directly begins to acknowledge God's hand in this situation again. And she's very clear in this language as she's talking to Ruth. She says, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. So she's rightfully seeing God, seeking to trust him, and then helping others to understand, Ruth in particular, that this is a part of God's covenant faithfulness to them as a people. God is not forsaking us, the living or the dead. Even though Elimelech passed away, even though my sons have passed away, they were trying to live a life for God, and it didn't work out. God didn't forget about their family. I mean, this is over 10 years have passed. But she's now remembering, oh wait, God did not forsake us. Brothers and sisters, there's a hardening that can happen in your life when you go through extended seasons of suffering and pain that can cause you to become callous and cause you to believe that God is done working in your life. Even when you feel like his love is delayed, it's not. God looked out for them and she couldn't see it until now. Church, are we aware of how our circumstances can jade our perspective? Are you aware that your own bitterness can set in and it can cause you from being active and taking responsibility in your life to becoming inactive and you removing responsibility from your own life? But praise be to God for Ruths in our lives who keep pushing us to move forward, who keep moving forward in faithfulness even when we struggle to. And then even for Ruth, as she's taking the step of faith, she begins to reap the same blessings that this family was telling her about, that, oh yeah, our God is the one who's a provider. And the person that was telling them about their God being a provider was the one that was more frustrated and bitter than her. See, this is how it can be sometimes in your faith, is that there's those who are in different seasons in their faith than you that can be the encouragement for you in your life. That's why we should always remain humble with who we put around us. And we should trust that God works through his people as a whole. In verse 21, Naomi tells Ruth of the wisdom in staying near Boaz, because it would be very easy for them to take their benefits and blessings and saying, okay, can we replicate this again? Do we go to another field? Do we go try this elsewhere and hope that something else will work out for us? But Naomi didn't want Ruth to leave this land for another harvest and hope that it will be better. And hear me on this. Hear me on this. For some of us, when it comes to trusting God in faith, some of us have the inclination to always look for the next best thing. Some of you walk into a space that has helped you to grow and takes us forward, and you're always looking over the fence to see if the grass is greener on the other side. What Naomi is saying to Ruth in this moment is, Ruth, do not get caught off guard by what is going on over there, that you want to go to the next field and try to reap there. Even though you've reaped here, you should press in and remain faithful to where God has placed you. In other words, here's another way of thinking about it. It's okay that things are going okay right now. You know how some people are like, all right, well, things are going really well right now, so I know something's bad about to happen, so I need to be ready to. That's an unhealthy way to live too. You're like, you know what, my family's doing all right, it's healthy, and man. Now, if you're becoming comfortable and relying upon yourself, that's where you get dangerous. But the space that you're in might just actually be a healthy space that you should be in. Nah, it's just too good to be true. We're going to find it out. I got to fill them out first. I'll get it, and then we'll get it. Like those types of things. You got to think about them and be aware of what's going on. She doesn't want her to leave. And here's the kicker. Why not? Because Naomi's family made the same mistake. God was faithful to them in Bethlehem. The famine set in. They're like, I'm going to their God, the Moabites. We talked about it in week 1, right, of the sermon series. Well, their God is the provider. We're going to go there and we're going to reap from the land. Where did she come back to, though? She knew where home was at. She came back to Yahweh's people. And so she doesn't want Ruth to do the same thing and to stop trusting God and his covenant faithfulness, but to take that step of faith with them. This challenge for her to Ruth is one that God will not let you down. He is actually a covenant keeper, and he holds to his promises. And church, that's what I want to leave us with today as we think about chapter 2, is that God is a covenant keeper. God is working and moving in our worlds and our lives. And through faith, we're trusting him to keep us moving forward. Regardless of the dry season, regardless if you feel like reaping the benefits, keep walking in faith.